This Behind the Haunting, we're going to tell you about the
Curse of Chief Cornstalk.
Hello there, Parapeeps, and welcome to another Behind the Haunting. Now, normally we do these live. However, we're having some technical difficulties with our internet, and we're on schedule. We have to get this out, so we're going to do it as a recorded video. However, we still want your involvement, just like we do with the live streams. So why don't you tell them what they could do to stay involved with this?
Well, you can open up a comment right now. And then, as you're watching the video, go ahead and type things in, questions, comments, etc. And then at the end of the video, submit it.
And of course, don't forget to hit that like button and share this out if you find this interesting and think other people would like it.
That's a good idea, too. So, why are we talking about this anyway? What does Cornstalk have to do with Point Pleasant?
Well, I'm glad you asked.
Oh, okay.
All right. So this is going to lay the foundation for the all the videos that we're putting out about Point Pleasant. If you've followed along on our haunted travels, you know we were just there this summer. Mm-hmm. Okay. And, you know, it's a small little town. It's where the Ohio River and the
Kanawha
River merge together right there on the Point Pleasant. Mm-hmm. Okay. But, wow, the stuff that's taken place there. Okay. So we've already done the low.
True.
Okay, the videos about the low, and we've done the videos about Silver Bridge. So this is kind of like after the fact. This should have been before that, but this might kind of make sense why there were some weird things going on. Okay, we're on schedule here, so we have to get this done, and then the next videos are going to make sense. But I'll put links to go back to the low in the Silver Bridge. It explains that, you know, what happened on that land. Okay, mm-hmm. And a lot of people believe that this is the origin. This is behind the haunting. Why there's so much weird things that happen in paranormal activity in Point Pleasant, including the Mothman and, you know, all kinds of things that happen.
And the tragedies that have happened there too.
And things like that.
Okay.
So that's why.
Okay. It's a good reason why.
So let's talk about the curse here a little bit. This goes back before the Mothman. This goes back to what Native Americans believed to be some of the interesting stuff that was taking place in Port Pleasant, dating back all the way to the late 1700s, which is related to Chief Cornstalk, whose actual name was Keigh-tugh-qua, which is translated to Cornstalk. But do you want to go ahead and tell them a little bit about
the chief?
Yeah, about the chief himself.
Sure, why not? So Chief Cornstalk was believed to have been born in Pennsylvania in about 1720. He moved to the Ohio area a little bit later than that, to an area near present-day Chillicothe. He moved there with his sister after a Shawnee problem.
Yeah, they fell back, meaning they were moving from the settlers, encroaching on their lands.
So that's why they had to move.
Yes.
Now, he was also believed to have been a big participant in the French and Indian War. And so that's kind of where he started to get some of his notoriety and fame. But he was believed to also have participated in Pontiac's rebellion and was involved in the peace negotiations of that. So that's pretty impressive for him. So that was the basics of like how he became important, and everybody started to revere him and basically take note of what he was saying and doing.
So I think we need to talk about Lord Dunmore's war. Would you like to cover that a little bit?
Yes, but I think we need to go back just a hair further, back to the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. I think that's kind of even a little bit more important to start there. So basically, this treaty was in 1768, And it said that the lands that were to the south of the Ohio River would be given to the Shawnee Nation as hunting grounds. They weren't really quite into that, as they basically had no role in giving up other lands that they were already on to the British. And so they weren't happy with it. They didn't sign this treaty, but they still abided by it. And then the British colonists, they decided, you know what, we want to go a little further. So they began slowly moving south of the Ohio River, looking for new places to settle. And the Shawnee are like, excuse me, we have a treaty here. This is my land. They didn't like that they were now pushing in, so this was going to be a second problem for them to have land. And so heated skirmishes started to take place and basically started a war. So who was in charge of this area during this time? Well, the governor of Virginia was John Murray. He was the 4th Earl of Dunmore, hence Lord Dunmore. He was asked to declare a state of war against the hostile Indian nations in order to bring up a volunteer militia for a campaign. And basically everything then came to a head at the Battle of Point Pleasant on October 10th of 1774, where Chief Cornstalk, the leader of the Shawnee and Mingo and Native Americans, basically were forced to retreat.
Yeah. Now we're going to talk more about the actual Battle of Point Pleasant in our next video, because we're going to talk a little bit more about the Fort Randolph and the actual battle, because we want to go a little bit more detail, because that's an interesting battle that took place again in such a small little area that all this took place. So this forced the retreat, forced another treaty called the Treaty of Camp Charlotte.
Another treaty.
Yes. Now, Chief Cornstalk, he had some experience with negotiations and signing these treaties and keeping peace. That's important that you keep that in mind, that he was a leader of his tribes, and he knew how to negotiate, and he knew how to speak well. He was a very good orator. So when this came about, he was forced to retreat at the battle because they were outnumbered and they were out firepower. Here come 1,000 men down the river with carrying guns and stuff, and they just couldn't. I think, and again, we'll talk about it in the next video. But I think Chief Cornstalk only had 1,200 total that were there, but there was 2 regiments coming their way, and there's just no way they could hold them. So they were forced to sign this again.
But this time they signed.
Yeah, but this time they signed. However, at the battle, there were 2 different. There was the Shawnee and the Mingo tribes. Okay, now Chief Logan was the head of the Mingo tribes. He wasn't there, and he didn't agree with this treaty. He didn't agree with signing it, which that's a whole different story, a little further north. But he sent a designee or whatever to this negotiation, and he really didn't agree with it. But what were they going to do?
So basically, with this treaty, they agreed to cease hunting and also to stop harassing any of the colonist travelers.
Well, they agreed to on paper. Okay.
Well, that's what the treaty said.
Right. That's what it said.
All right.
So Chief Cornstalk becomes the Peacemaker. Okay. And basically, this is like the beginning of the kind of like the splitting of the Shawnee Nation. All right. Where he was like the British and the colonists and things like that really held him in great respect for keeping peace. Okay. And that's important to know too. He worked to keep the Native Americans kind of like out of it, but kind of watching what's going on. Out of the American Revolution. And they do say that the battle at Point Pleasant was like the first battle of the American Revolution, although we heard that at Fort Necessity too, but whatever.
Details.
Details. Okay. He represented the Shawnee Nation in different treaties too, at Fort Pitt in 1775 and 1776. These were the first Native American treaties negotiated with the government, the new government of the United States. Many of the Shawnee Nation was hoping that the British, they were kind of pulling for the British because they wanted to reclaim their lands back. And it was the colonialists or colonists that were taking over the land. But Chief Cornstalk kept the peace. But by the winter of 1776, this is where that split was. Those who remained neutral, he was the chief of those Native Americans, and those who didn't agree, there were other leaders, such as Blue Jacket. All right, so now you kind of know a little bit more about Chief Cornstalk.
And why he was important. In that area,
right.
Yeah.
All right, so this leads to the fall of 1777.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Yes. Uh-oh's right. And now there's a fort established, Fort Randolph. And again, we're going to be talking about this in the next video. But Cornstalk went to make a diplomatic visit to the fort. So he was just stopping by to do a little bit of business, so to speak.
Hi, how you doing?
That's right.
Okay.
It was him, his youngest son, and two other representatives was with him. Again, he was there just to kind of keep the peace, check on things, that kind of thing. But he was detained. He was detained by the fort commander, who had decided on his own initiative, no orders, that any time he ran into any type of Native Americans, he was going to basically arrest them and detain them for no reason. Because probably these skirmishes were still going on, and he was tired of it. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, Richard, you want to talk about the next little bad thing that happened?
Well, basically, while he was captured or detained, some of the people from the fort had gone out on a little deer hunting expedition. And while they were out, there was a skirmish and they were killed by different Native American tribes. And news got back to the fort, and they basically went ballistic. They're like, we're just going to take it out on any Indian we find, any Native American we got, they're done. So they went in right into where Cornstalk and the others were being held, which at the time, it was pretty nice. They were being, held in a nice room. It wasn't anything.
Right. They were detained.
Right.
They weren't in a jail cell or
right.
anything. And actually, they were helping them with things at the fort.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Things got
so
ugly.
Anyhow, they come by and they just basically come in and start killing them. Cornstalk stood up to him, and he it took apparently 8 bullets to knock Cornstalk down. Some of the others were strangled. His son was shot. So basically, they took him out.
Yeah, Cornstalk was a big guy. He was over 6 foot tall.
Yeah.
And a big guy.
Yeah.
So it took a while.
Even with those 8 bullets, he didn't die immediately.
Right.
And so this is where he ends up producing that curse.
Well, we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
American political and military leaders were alarmed by this. like I said, he was a very important man, okay? And they were alarmed that this happened. Now, this guy right here, Patrick Henry.
Some of you should know him.
Yeah, if you don't know that, you probably heard of "Give Me Liberty" or "Give Me Death." That was coined by Patrick Henry. But
he was, of course, the governor of Virginia at the time, and he said that those assassins, they were killers, they were assassins. He called them vile assassins and had them brought to trial because their fellow soldiers wouldn't testify against them, though. Everybody was acquitted.
Right.
But at least Patrick Henry was trying to keep the peace, kind of like Cornstalk.
Okay. Now, at this point, we need to say something here, okay? There's two different beliefs about the historical aspect of what we're going to do moving on.
Say it isn't so. Two different theories about what happened?
There are historians that say, no, this isn't true, this didn't happen. And then there are people who say, yep, this is how it happened, this is what went down. Okay?
Shocker.
Everything so far has been pretty close to being historically accurate that we can determine. Okay?
Yeah, and that there aren't multiple stories about. Right. Like, it follows pretty much a straight line.
Right. But what we're going to cover next,
we're going to veer a little.
Historically accurate, folklore, legend. Now we're getting into Panic DR, Haunted Travel stuff. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So let's talk about the curse.
Okay, so here's Cornstalk, shot 8 times, laying there, dying, and he pretty much makes a statement according to many individuals. And his statement, do you want me to read it or just leave it?
Read it verbatim.
Okay.
Yes.
I was the border man's friend. Many times I have saved him and his people from harm. I never warred with you, but only to protect our wigwams and lands. I refused to join your pale-face enemies with the redcoats. I came to the fort as your friend, and you murdered me. You have murdered by my side my young son. For this, may the curse of the Great Spirit rest upon this land. May it be blighted by nature. May it even be blighted by its hopes. May the strength of its peoples be paralyzed by the stain of our blood.
Now, the date, November 10th, 1777.
Yes.
Now's where it gets interesting.
Yes, because supposedly along with this statement, he said that this would last for 200 years.
Are you ready? Let's go over some of the issues and things that took place in Point Pleasant since that date for the next 200 years. Sounds like we're going to be here for hours, but we're not. We're almost finished.
Yes, because remember, records aren't always the greatest back in the 1800s, so some things didn't get recorded and written down, right? So yep. There's gaps.
There's gaps. All right. Go ahead. I'm going to click the buttons while you read because you're doing so well.
Oh, thanks, sweetie.
All right. You ready?
Sure. All right. So the first thing is that we went from 1777
yes.
to 1840 with Cornstalk being buried in one location near Fort Randolph.
Yes.
All the other Native Americans, by the way, that were with him at the time when he was killed, their bodies were just thrown in the river.
Right.
Which, probably not the nicest thing to do, but that was it. But he was actually buried. And so his remains in 1840 end up getting dug up and moved to the Mason County Courthouse. Okay? Now, somewhere in the late 1800s, somewhere around 1880 or so, there was a big fire that took place in the town of Point Pleasant, and it took out almost the whole city. Definitely a full city block, And if you've ever been to Point Pleasant, you know Point Pleasant's not that big.
Not much. It's
So
about a city block.
it took out pretty much most of the city. So we have big fire. 1907 comes along. In 1907, they have the worst coal mine disaster in American history. 310 coal miners are killed. It's not a good day. 1909, they decide they're going to put up a monument to those who fought in the battle, against Cornstalk. So they go ahead, they set it all up, they're preparing it, they're putting it up. And what happens? Oh, yeah. The crane that was putting it up gets struck by lightning. Some freak lightning that comes along totally dismantles the crane for about a month.
Yeah.
It took them like a month to get the repairs done. That's how bad this lightning strike was for it. So they finally get that up. And then 1913 comes along. Big flood. Destroys, again, most of Point Pleasant. 1921. Another freak lightning strike. It hits that monument.
Same monument.
The monument that it hit the crane when they was trying to put it up, now it actually physically gets hit by lightning itself. And as it does that, they damage the capstone and several of the granite blocks, and so it needs repaired. Another flood in 1937. So in 1937, again, most of Point Pleasant gets destroyed by yet another flood. Yeah, so now, granted, they're right along the river,
right, but two big major... Yeah. That's why they have a flood wall now.
Yes, yes. 1944, 150 individuals get killed by a giant tornado that comes sweeping through town. 1950s, they decide they're going to move Cornstalk again. So they pick up his remains and they move him now to Indy Way Park. Okay? Now, all that's left of him after the couple hundred years, right, and the two moves, all that's left are 3 teeth. I showed 2. 3 teeth and 15 small fragments of bone. So he's not all moved to the park.
All that was left.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually got to visit Cornstalk's final resting place. And we have a video coming out about that park. There's a lot of stuff in that park.
There's a ton of stuff in that park.
A lot of stuff. So that's enough to do
especially
like a whole
for the size of the park. It's not that big, right, but they've got a ton of stuff in it.
So he was buried, his final resting place is buried right next to that monument.
The one that keeps getting hit by lightning.
Yep, that's right where they put him.
Mm-hmm. But those were his rivals that was actually dedicated to. So the one that keeps getting hit by lightning, those are his rivals. He's being buried now for the rest of eternity, theoretically, unless they decide to pick him up and move him again. Pretty much right next to the monument dedicated to his rivals.
Okay. Well, let's continue on with issues.
Oh, wait, there's more?
Oh, there's lots more.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yes. So let's move along to 1953. A couple years later, there's a barge explosion that kills 6 men right there along the river. Just imagine just one day the barge just sitting there and explodes. 1967, we start having these Mothman reports. The Mothman is showing up. And the Silver Bridge disaster, which claims the lives of 46 people.
Now, we already did the video about the Silver Bridge, okay? But we're going to be doing a Behind the Haunting next week about the Mothman.
Ooh.
And go over the reports and the story of the Mothman and things like that next week. Okay? But this is all tied together.
And that should tie in with this, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yes. All right, so we're going to move along.
Allegedly.
Yes, allegedly.
I don't want to get any nasty comments.
We'll move along. All right, so 1968, there is an airline crash. The Piedmont Airlines plane crashes and 35 people die. Another plane crash in 1970 in the near area. A DC-10 will kill 75 individuals. 1976, that Mason County Jail, the Mason County Courthouse area, right? Mason County Jail explodes as a result of, well, we'll just leave it to your imagination. But 3 law enforcement individuals were killed along with 2 people who were there. One who was in jail and one who is theoretically the reason for the explosion.
Caused the explosion.
Yeah. And then in 1978, there was a large train derailment. It spilled tons of different toxic chemicals into the water supply for the town. That's just not good.
They had to abandon their wells. That's how bad it was.
Yeah, it was
Into
not
the
good.
drinking water.
There were thousands of different types of chemicals, and they were all toxic and definitely caused problems. 1978, 51 men are working on a scaffold just outside Point Pleasant.
Okay, and you actually can see the power plant from Point Pleasant.
Yes. So they're working at the power plant, the scaffolding collapses, and 51 men die. Now look at that date, 1978. Cornstalk's alleged curse for 200 years from 1777. That's just a hair over 200 years.
201 years from the date of the curse.
And since that time, there doesn't seem
to be... We're not saying it is a curse that's causing it. We're just providing you information.
There haven't been, supposedly, there haven't been any major issues since.
Major issues. Now, there are things that happen, like the river, the museum that's across from the park. How do you say the park's name?
Indeway.
Okay. There's a museum there that caught fire.
It caught fire about a year or so ago.
Right. Just recently. I mean, recently, like within the past few days, there's been another fire at Point Pleasant. But these aren't, I mean, those are tragedies, don't get me wrong, but major tragedies since 1978, which was 201 years. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some people say the 200 years was part of his final comments. Some say... No, he just basically cursed the land, no time frame. So.
All right. Now, normally with our
Behind the
Hauntings, we have some questions that we ask those in chat, but we're not live. So we're going to ask you these questions to answer them down in the comments. Okay?
So make sure you still have your little...
Yeah, and if you already closed it, go ahead and open a new one. Doesn't matter. You can do multiple comments.
Yeah.
So here we go. Question number 1. Do you think the tragedies that have occurred in the small town of Point Pleasant are just coincidences or related to the curse of Cornstalk that placed on the land? What do you think? What are your opinions about that? Number 2. You want to handle that one?
Oh, we're not going to answer them for us?
No.
Oh. That's usually we do.
We're not.
Okay, so number 2, how would the outcome of the American Revolution have changed, do you think, if Cornstalk was not killed and he remained alive?
And number 3, why don't you go ahead and read that one as well.
All right. Do you think that it's possible that some of the paranormal activity that's taking place in Point Pleasant is actually related to the movement of Cornstalk's grave and that final location of his current burial site? Do you think that somehow that has led to unrest in the area? Because there's a lot of buildings in that really small town that have claims.
Yes.
I mean, it's a really small town.
Yeah. All right, so if you're watching this later on, if you look at the videos a little bit before and after this, we have a lot more related to Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Go ahead and take a look at them. We're going to try to put all these all in one big playlist as well and on our blog site. So, sorry we couldn't do this live. Hopefully we get this internet thing situated here at some point where we can start doing these live again, because they are a lot of fun to do live.
Yeah, it was kind of weird today without their input, when because usually they have some good questions and we throw in some discussion points along the way.
Yeah, but
so
oh well,
it
we
is
had
what
to
it
get
is.
it done and get it out. All right,
Those
you have anything
updates.
Else? Yeah, I know.
Updates.
You have anything else?
No, I think we're good.
All right, folks. Until next time.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to answer those questions down below.
And happy hunting.
If you like this episode of Behind the Haunting, make sure you hit that like button and leave us a comment below. Also, if you'd like to see more videos from Panic D videos in the future, make sure you subscribe and ding that bell so you get notified the next time we post a video or go live.